Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be jumping back into my ongoing retrospective of Spawn with Spawn number 40. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 1996, we see right here a really cool cover by Tony Daniel, who was also the interior penciler for this issue. Looks great in my opinion. You've got Spawn flying through the air with a bunch of creepy looking clawed cybernetic hands reaching out toward him, along with some strange cybernetic looking tentacles grabbing onto him, pulling at his costume. This all plays into exactly what's going on in the interior story, and I actually appreciate that a lot when the cover ties in directly to the story. So kudos to Tony for taking that extra little, time to do this kind of thing with his artwork. Story, Todd McFarlane. Pencils, Tony Daniel. Inks, Kevin Conrad. Letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Todd Broker. Computer color assist, Roy Young. The issue starts off in the Bowery. Most of the Spawn story takes place, or is spoken of as taking place, in Hell's Kitchen. However, this specifically states that it's a part of the Bowery known as Rat City, a portion of the Bowery that no one formally acknowledges. You will hear residents sometimes speak of it, occasionally police officers or some firefighters, but they tend to keep it on the hush-hush, as this apparently is an extra terrible part of the Bowery that's so bad that most homeless people don't even like to live here. However, this is the part of the Bowery that Spawn calls home, as we see him slowly approaching the hidden section of alleyways that hold his throne. At this point, Spawn is actually quite drunk, as he's just finished tying one off with Bobby and Bootsy, and even thinks to himself, how can they possibly drink that cheapo crap wine that they're buying all the time every single night? I feel like crap, and they're just tying one off like this every night of the week. As he rounds the corner and approaches his throne, he's actually quite surprised when he sees 4 homeless men crowding around his throne doing something, and he's starting to wonder exactly what they're up to. Spawn walks up behind the men, grabbing one of them on the shoulder, stating, "Can I help you?" This, of course, startles all of them, as one even thinks to himself, I just peed my pants. They state that they were just trying to fix up Spawn's throne and make it more comfortable for him. Interestingly enough, they refer to him as Spawn and not Al, which should have been a little bit of a clue for Spawn in this instance, as all of the other men in the alleyways always call him Al. He tells them that he doesn't like them messing around his throne, and from now on he wants them to stay away from it, and that he also wants to be alone, so they need to beat it. He notices that one of the men is kind of laughing to himself, and Spawn asks why. One of the other men interjects, stating, "Oh, don't worry about him. He fried his brain with drugs years ago. He's just like that all the time." At this point, Spawn just brushes it off, as I stated before, he is feeling rather under the weather due to the alcohol he's consumed. And once again, he's brooding in his own self-pity, but he's also trying to figure out a few things. He's learned from Cagliostro that Jason Wynn may not, in fact, be the mastermind behind his murder, and he's not certain if that's 100% true, or if it is true and he's been chasing ghosts this whole time. He's also not certain exactly how Terry is connected to Wynn and why he's working directly under him as his head of security, as Terry was just a desk jockey when Spawn died as Al Simmons, and now suddenly he seems to be in a very high up position, almost in a number 2 role to Jason Wynn, which is shocking to him. And then, of course, he goes back to dwelling on his ex-wife, Wanda, and is worried about the fact that, for as much as everyone seems to want a piece of him, both the mob and the CIA and the bums of the alleyways and the police, the one person whose attention that he does want to have is Wanda's, and she wants nothing to do with him, as she's absolutely terrified of his presence. Spawn's costume then begins to tingle, and Spawn believes that this is just a result of him being very drunk and brushes it off. However, he's forgetting that the costume itself is its own sentient entity, and its reactions are not necessarily dictated by him or his state of mind. which means that the costume probably knows a little bit more about what's going on in this instance than he does, given his altered state of consciousness. We also see the men that were around his throne running away quickly, stating, "Let's get the hell out of here, it's been activated." And within a split second, suddenly tons of mechanical tentacles all shoot out of Spawn's throne and start latching onto him, grabbing him and restraining him. They then immediately shock his system with thousands of volts of electricity as he is stunned and in immense pain, and his whole body convulses as he tries to get away, but it's no use as the voltage that's coursing through his body is more than enough to subdue him. When the electricity finally stops, Spawn is rendered unconscious, as this booby trap was specifically designed for the complete shutdown of an entity made entirely from necroplasm. We also learn that the bums who set this trap were not bums at all. They were in fact technicians who were disguised as bums and paid to execute the very first stage of this elaborate plan. We then see this forklift, which is being operated by three cloaked, dark-looking figures as they burst through boxes hidden behind rubble and fences from the alleyway. And we also see during this close-up of them driving the forklift that they are cybernetically enhanced beings wearing weird little druid-type cloaks. They only refer to each other as numbers, but they are all working together in this very elaborate plan. As they continue to drive the forklift forward, Spawn is still unconscious. However, they know that time is of the essence, as they don't know how long this will be the case. The one driving the forklift finally states that the others need to calm down so he can get this right, as they're only going to get one shot at it, as we see them quickly approach the throne from behind as he slams it into gear and thrusts both of the forks from the lift directly through Spawn's chest. Spawn's body lurches and he gasps involuntarily, but is still unconscious from the electric booby trap. We then see the forklift pull him and his throne off the ground as the creatures driving the forklift are joined by some more accomplices with a large crate. They place the crate over top of Spawn and his throne as a means to disguise it from any watchful eyes, and quickly drive to a nearby moving truck where they place the crate in the back of it, close the doors, and take off to a predetermined rendezvous point, potentially even leaving the city proper. Also, I'd like to point out, despite the fact that this is just an establishing shot, I really like it. Tony Daniel does a great job at city skylines, and I really enjoy his perspective and the way that they've used some probably computer imagery to blur the foreground objects and then keep the background in focus. This all comes together really good, and this is like kind of, I hate to call it a throwaway panel, but that's sort of what it is. But it looks phenomenal. I really like what Tony Daniel does with the backgrounds of his cityscapes. We then teleport to another part of the city where Terry Fitzgerald is working late and calls his wife Wanda Blake to check in on her and their young daughter. And while their daughter Cyan is doing all right, Wanda is not. She's up late trying to figure out a way of distracting herself from the horrible thoughts that she's constantly plagued by with all of the events that have been going on lately. We see her sitting in bed, and she states that whenever she stops reading the book Waiting to Exhale, which would have been quite relevant at the time, she constantly just goes back to her mind racing about all of the things that are going on with Spawn and the fact that he knows where they live and has been to their home. And she tells Terry that despite the fact that the CIA has given them extra security to watch over the house, that's not comforting to her in any way, as Spawn was able to infiltrate the CIA headquarters in New York and attack Jason Wynn in his office. So if he can do that, what's going to stop him from just barging directly into their home and doing whatever he likes? Now, Terry does bring up that the last time Spawn showed up that he did knock, but this only confuses Wanda more. She doesn't understand why Spawn knocked or why he stated that he was her ex-husband, or late husband, Al Simmons. and that she finds that just disgusting on a whole nother level on top of everything else that's been going on. Realizing that Wanda is just super frazzled and bothered by everything that's been going on and that she is under tremendous mental stress, Terry suggests that he figure out a way to take some time off for the next few days, and that way the three of them can all hit up the coast and take a little bit of a vacation to try and just put their minds at ease and get away from everything and relax for a few days and try and put all of this ugly business with Jason Wynn, the CIA, and Spawn behind them, if for just a little while. We are then teleported to somewhere outside of New York City. We don't know where because it's never stated where. We then join a young boy by the name of Tony, who has been consistently skipping school to go fishing and is rather excited because today he got his first bite. Now, he didn't actually catch the fish, but he does feel that he's one step closer to potentially doing so, and that it's been weeks since he started fishing, and now he's finally able to get a single bite. Now, it's also noted that he never uses bait of any kind, so that might be part of his problem. However, as he's walking through the snow, he is cut off by the local sheriff, who, while he should be taking Tony back to school, is rather in the middle of a very important objective and doesn't have time to deal with this. He simply shouts out his window at Tony to go home quickly and to tell his welfare mother to keep him inside, as he's got a real problem on his hands. We then see that he is working with a group of local hunters as they are tracking a very large animal that has been killing a lot of livestock and other wild animals in the area. As the men move through the snow, one of them finds something as they come across a carcass that is a fresh kill, in fact. So fresh that the blood has not actually coagulated yet. The men are shocked to see this, as this doesn't look like the kill of anything that lives in the area that would prey upon these animals. And they're also rather surprised that there are no tracks around, which doesn't make any sense to them. So this comes into the idea that they believe they may in fact be hunting a Bigfoot. However, some of the men are rather skeptical about this. Also, I'd like to point out that Tony Daniel, while I do enjoy his artwork, has made kind of that mistake of drawing something but not knowing exactly how to make it look the way it should. I don't think Tony knows a whole lot about hunting or guns. First of all, this man here is holding a gun-like object. I don't know what this is supposed to be. Second, Rottweilers, which is what these two dogs are, aren't really the type of dogs you would take hunting, and they're not really bred for like tracking prey animals. There are several other types of dogs that would be much better suited for this type of mission. And this man here, while supposedly a seasoned hunter, brought nothing but a semi-automatic pistol that looks to be of a low caliber. That doesn't make sense at all. There are such a thing as hunting pistols. This is not one of them. Hunting pistols are usually large caliber revolvers with large scopes attached to the top of them. This is neither of those things. I applaud Tony for his stellar artwork, but this is definitely something that he made a very obvious mistake with. At this point, the dogs suddenly run off, and their owner, Roy, knows exactly what it is. They picked up the scent of something, as he can hear them barking, but suddenly shrieking. This, of course, scares him, as this is something that he's familiar with when one of his dogs in the previous season was mauled by a bear. He and the other men take off running towards the sounds, as they hope to be able to catch this animal and take it out before all of Roy's dogs have been killed. As they get closer to the sounds, they see a large silhouette and believe it is some sort of an enormous bear. However, when they get around the tree, they realize that this is no bear, and they don't actually know that it's a gorilla, as one of the men actually states that he believes it is in fact Bigfoot. Of course, none of these men would have ever seen a silverback cyborg gorilla in their life before, so it's, somewhat believable that they would not understand what they were looking at. We see Cy-Gor is in fact eating one of the dogs alive, and this infuriates Roy. One of the men asks what he's doing, and Roy states, "He's got my dog, and I'm not going to let him get away with this." Also, it's implied here that the reason there were no tracks is because Cy-Gor was making his way through the trees. which isn't technically right. I mean, silverback gorillas are more terrestrial animals, not, swinging through the trees like chimps. And even if he was able to do that, it's stated that Cy-Gor is somewhere in the range of about 13 feet tall. And on top of being incredibly heavy just from the fact that he's a silverback gorilla, he's also half mechanical, which means that his weight would probably be way too much for any of the local forest trees to be able to support. Again, I know I'm being overly critical about this, but it's just something that I noticed when I was reading. The men all open fire on Cy-Gor, and some of them even connect. However, they're not exactly sure where they need to be shooting to severely injure this beast. Cy-Gor decides to make a retreat, even though he could easily kill all of the men who are attacking him, and is gone in a flash. The men are actually shocked at how quickly a creature of this size can move. One of the men calls back to the sheriff to give him an update as to what the creature was and where it's headed, while the other two men put the clearly dying dogs out of their misery. The sheriff is informed that the creature is headed towards Oak Ridge Creek, so he makes a beeline to that area. However, this is where the young boy Tony has actually gone to continue fishing instead of going home like the sheriff told him. The sheriff, speeding towards the location, ramps his SUV through the air and is about to land directly on top of Tony, who looks back terrified. However, before impact, the SUV is suddenly destroyed with a blow from out of nowhere, smashing into hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces. We then see that Cy-Gor is the one that destroyed the vehicle as he holds Tony in his arms, protecting him. However, it is implied that the sheriff was killed as the vehicle was destroyed, as we see some blood on the wreckage. We then get a little bit of backstory as Cy-Gor was part of the biomechanical neurological transferal system and was later given the term or the codename Cy-Gor, as he is a cybernetic gorilla, so it does make sense. And that he was engineered to be a walking tank that could be controlled, and it was almost successful. However, the locals of this area will never call him by his code name and will forever remember him as a Bigfoot, as we see that after he left, he put Tony in a tree to keep him safe, and Tony, not scared of this creature at all, just simply thinks to himself, man, thanks, Bigfoot. And this is a new revelation about the character of Cy-Gor, as up until this point, he has been portrayed mostly as a horrific killing machine that's unstoppable to some degree. And we see here that he actually does care about the welfare of some beings, as even though the hunters attacked him, he didn't kill them when he had the opportunity, and he made a point to do everything he could to save the life of this young boy who he had never met. So there's definitely something going on in Cy-Gor's psyche that is much deeper than this horrible monster facade that he walks around with. We are then teleported to another mystery location as Spawn is slowly coming back to consciousness, looking at some dark figures above him as they work with some wires and tools. And he lifts his head up and states that he's in some sort of Dr. Frankenstein lab, complete with hooded henchmen. And then his thoughts are interrupted when a familiar voice states, "Don't strain too hard there, Hellspawn." We then find out that the mastermind behind this plan to kidnap Spawn was none other than the Curse, a villain that we haven't seen in a little while. Curse is actually quite gleeful at his plan working out so splendidly and him now having Spawn in his clutches. Spawn immediately realizes that this is in fact Curse as he states his name, and Curse is actually quite happy that Spawn remembers him, as he states, I'm glad that you remember me because I definitely remember you after you defeated me and then strung me up on the wall of your alleyways. I also remember your old pal Sansker who wanted to kill me too. Of course, this is referring to the Blood Feud miniseries. If you'd like to learn more about the Blood Feud miniseries story, you can check out every issue of the Blood Feud miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist. Curse then goes on to talk about how his associates are very carefully removing parts from Spawn and cataloging them, and that he himself was able to separate the costume from Spawn's body, though it was rather difficult, and he's not going to go into how much work it actually was. We also notice that Curse now has 2 cybernetic arms, whereas before he only had 1. It's implied that Cy-Gor removed the other biological arm against Curse's will. We also see that Curse has outfitted one of his arms with a circular saw and other surgical implements, as he states that this isn't so much of an operation as it is more so a dissection, as he also talks about separating the chains was rather difficult and is still proving difficult, as the chains seem to be putting up more of a objection to all of this than any of the rest of Spawn's body or costume. However, Spawn ignores all this as he seems to be more focused on the one word that Curse said a moment ago, which was dissection, as a drop of necroplasm falls on his forehead. We then see that the drop came from the lower half of Spawn's body, as we see that Curse has split Spawn in half like a Cox brother. He then states that he's actually quite happy that Spawn is now conscious and seeing all of this, as he wants Spawn to feel all the pain and agony that will come from him removing Spawn's living brain as we reach the end of the issue. We then get into image info, which is actually a little bit different this time. Instead of it being an update about upcoming comic books, it's actually a time where Terry Fitzgerald just posts a bunch of pictures talking about things that have been going on the past few years. This is a picture of him and one of his friends going to Las Vegas. This is a picture of him and Todd McFarlane's uncle at a convention. This is a picture of Julia Simmons and Tiffany McFarlane, who I believe is Todd's sister. And this is a picture of him and the man named Bo, the real man, Smith. And congratulations to Bo's parents, because they actually chose the correct spelling of his name, not that wrong B-O spelling that so many other people use. We then reach the spawning ground. Now, normally this is where readers will submit letters that Todd may or may not respond to. However, that's not the case. This issue, Todd just takes the entirety of the spawning ground to talk about some things that have been going on, notably the lower quality of the interiors of Spawn as of late. And he explains this is due to the fact that his father-in-law had recently been diagnosed with and was battling brain cancer. And between him dealing with this major family medical emergency alongside trying to produce Spawn and run a successful toy company, he had been stretched too thin, and that the comic was suffering as a result. He states, though, that his father-in-law is doing a bit better at this point, and that he's also going to stop with the bi-weekly issues to try and make sure that they don't run into this problem again if something were to arise, and that they can take a whole month to produce a quality issue. Personally, I always found the bi-weekly issue to be kind of ridiculous anyway, especially given how small an operation Image Comics is by comparison to like DC and Marvel. He also then starts to lay out a full roadmap for the next 2 years of storytelling in Spawn, which I found to be really shocking. I mean, he doesn't go into like super elaborate detail, but he still gives away a lot more than I would have guessed he would in a single issue of a comic book, especially one that has a very linear storyline the way that Spawn does. He also gives an update about the toy line, and then includes pictures down here of him throughout the country going to different conventions. We see him with the Spawn mobile and whoever they had paid to dress up as Spawn. Here he's pictured with, oh, I'm sorry, no, he's not pictured. These are Al Simmons in the middle here, and the real Al Simmons. And I forget who these other two gentlemen are. And then this is a statue that somebody made of Clown that they had been lugging around and touring with as well. I don't know if this statue still exists. Perhaps. It would be really cool if it did, but I can't speak to as to whether or not that's true. We then get this super cool pinup by Teresa Nielsen. I don't know if she used airbrush or oil pastel for this. It's not stated, but the image is fantastic. Usually, of course, I complain about vertical spreads. However, this is a pinup, so it's completely okay. I have no problem with pinups being on a vertical layout like this. But this, of course, is a depiction of Angela standing over the defeated remains of the medieval Spawn after slaying him. And it just looks so good. And like I said, I have a really hard time distinguishing whether or not this is oil pastel or airbrush, as generally speaking, if someone does airbrush in a very specific manner, you can make it look a lot like oil pastels. And in a magazine print type of format, it is kind of difficult to decipher which one it is. I'm leaning more towards oil pastel with this, but I've been wrong in the past, so I could be wrong here. Either way, this is a fantastic piece of artwork, and I applaud Teresa. This is top notch. You're awesome, Teresa. If you ever see this, I'd love to see more of your work. We then reach the end cap section where Todd gives a full rundown about everything that's going on with McFarlane Toys. However, this is the exact same end cap that appeared in issue number 39. So if you want to know my thoughts about it, just go watch what I said about it in my episode on issue number 39, because I really don't see the reason to repeat everything for this episode. We then get to the Spawn Direct mailing form. This, of course, was just a way to order all sorts of Spawn memorabilia like apparel and toys and autographed toys and trading cards. Obviously, this is from a not really pre-internet era, but pre to the internet era that we live in today in 2025 as I'm recording this video. Trying to order things online was a much different process in 1996, so it was still far more regular to do this type of mail-away ordering than it was to buy things online. And honestly, I really wish that some of these apparel designs would come back. Some of the t-shirt designs that he had back in the 90s were just super cool, and in my opinion, a lot better than some of the designs that he has today for some of the t-shirts that exist for Spawn. And I would love him if Todd would just do like a retro line of t-shirts and reuse all these designs from that time period. Even if for just a limited run, I would totally buy some of it myself. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for the original Cy-Gor action figure. And while it's not a bad figure, it definitely is not the most accurate toy representation of Cy-Gor. Later iterations of Cy-Gor in the toy line would be far better, in my opinion, in terms of really giving you an idea of what this character had been portrayed as in the comic books. Whereas this seems to be more aimed at like a children's playability factor, even though Todd very much recognized the collector's market that was buying up all of his toys at this time. This figure just very much seems like something that you would give to a child to play with versus hang up on your wall, especially given how different it is from Cy-Gor's design in the comics. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Spawn board game. I've talked about this in the past, so I'm not going to go into it today. And that was Spawn number 40. And honestly, I really like this issue. I got to be real with you guys. I completely forgot about this whole storyline of Curse kidnapping Spawn and dissecting him like this. I recalled Curse making returns. I can't remember if there's more than just this one, but I think there's more later on. But this storyline completely slipped my mind until rereading this issue. Granted, it had been probably 15 to 18 years since I read this issue of Spawn. But still, like, it's a pretty major storyline in terms of, like, this is the first time we've seen Spawn be, like, really, you know, up against the wall and super defeated like this in a way that it's not obvious how he's going to get out of it. So you'd think it would have, like, stuck in my mind a little bit more than it did. And while overall I really like the whole side story with Cy-Gor and it giving more depth to the Cy-Gor character, it still is difficult for me to forget that the whole backstory of Cy-Gor's existence and why he was developed, makes no sense in the whole scheme of not only Spawn, but the entire Image universe. The backstory is that the reason they were making a cybernetic gorilla was because that humans can't take the pain of having cybernetics integrated into their body. And that would be a great explanation were it not for the fact that there are literally dozens of cyborg humans that exist, not just in the pages of Spawn, but also throughout the entire Image universe. Overkill is a cyborg. Curse is a cyborg. You had in 2 cyborg gangs that fought each other in Spawn number 11. Then you have Cyber Force, who is an entire team of cyborgs. You also have Super Patriot, that's a cyborg. There's literally almost, laundry list of cybernetic humans that already exist, and Todd knew of that. So why would you make that the explanation for Cy-Gor's existence when it doesn't seem logical in any way that that would be why they created him? It really just bugs me, despite the fact that the character is great and the story past that origin point is actually great too. It's just this one thing that really kind of bugs me. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinion may be that that doesn't matter at all and that Cy-Gor is so cool you could just kind of overlook it. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.